OTB's The Hurling Pod with James Skehill and Paul Murphy.
Tá craobhna here in an Ashan Gailliam. People of Galway, we love you.
I don't want to leave the people of Waterford down, because they're my life, People of Waterford are my life, and I love me county,
We love John Malone.
It's almost like they're afraid to kind of go and hurl and just let themselves express themselves. It's like as if they're nearly afraid to make a mistake, and sometimes you have to make a mistake and just throw off that bit of nervousness and have a go.
Yeah, it's pure constipated hurling.
Welcome along to the Hurling Pod. What is that sense? It is a sense of anticipation because it's Championship Week. The Munster and Leinster Hurling Championships get underway this weekend. It's going to be quite a conundrum to try and work out who's going to come out of each province. 3 places are available in each. The top 2 will go straight into a provincial final, and the bottom 2 sides in the Leinster Championship, if the Joe McDonough is not won by Kerry, will have to meet to decide who drops down into the Joe McDonough for next season. We'll be trying to work some of that out ahead of what's a pretty tasty first weekend of fixtures, which includes a rematch of last year's All-Ireland final between Cork and Limerick. Delighted to say that Paul Murphy, James Skehill with me to break all of it down. How are you getting on, lads?
Great, Will.
Evening, how are you?
Do we just dive straight into this, Paul? Because we've been talking about this throughout the league, where the form line's at, which team's been impressing. We kind of agreed at the end of last week's pod that Waterford looked really good and maybe they've closed the gap to Limerick this year, but still it was incredibly difficult to pick out which teams are going to come out. And I reckon, because that's looking at Munster, everyone talks about Munster and what a difficult one it is to call. I think Leinster is incredibly difficult to call as well, with 4 teams who haven't looked too different standard-wise from each other throughout the league.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we can look at the league to a certain extent and look for indicators what's going to be brought to Championship. But, only 50%, 60% of that actually translates over into Championship, because we see so much of the league, and it happens year on year. Teams are trying to find form. Teams are at different stages of their preparation, pre-season and different things. And teams just hit different form. And when it comes to Championship, look, there's always that element. It's Championship, everything goes out the window and teams just start to get a run on things. Other teams start to slip into maybe bad form. The big one, I suppose, with Munster and Leinster is the case that, okay, in Munster you have the 4 games, 2 home, 2 away, and then in Leinster you have the either 3 home and 2 away, or 2 home and 3 away. So there's dynamics there, and then again it's a case of who are you meeting in those away matches, who are you meeting in the home matches. So if you look at Leinster, the likes of Galway and Wexford probably have the more favoured one, where they have 2 of the bigger teams at home. So it's hard. There's a lot to dissect, there's a lot to take away. Certainly we'll take some things from the league. We've seen that Wexford are capable of mounting savage challenges against the big teams, and they are an excellent team and capable of beating any team on their day. I don't think Limerick will carry the same form from the league into Championship. I think we will see the traditional Limerick that we've seen over the last few years. But you could go on about every team at this stage and take it apart. But like what we predict here now today could be completely wrong after the first weekend, and that's the beauty of it. That's what we're looking forward to.
Don't worry, we can learn as we go along and we can reform our opinions. We grow as these next 40 days.
And we can blame it on Skehill, more importantly. That's what we can do.
Well, James, when it comes to league form, I mean, I don't need to point this out to a Galway man, but I remember the conversations 12 months ago, Galway coming out of the league, people were saying, hey, look at the way that Galway have hurled, even though it was a COVID league and whatever else. But everyone was impressed by Galway this time last year, and it just didn't happen in Championship. It is the danger of sometimes reading too much into league form.
Yeah, it was a bit of chalk and cheese last year. Like I myself kind of fell victim to it, because it was a quite impressive league campaign. They introduced a couple of new players, and we had a couple of injuries last year throughout the league and managed to get into a good spot without those players. So I was thinking and the draw was kind of, it looked positive because it was going to be Dublin and Croke Park. So it wasn't in Parnell Park, which is notoriously a difficult place to play for Galway. And it just fell flat in its face. I can't think of a more, I suppose, negative kind of championship that Galway have had in a long, long time with the 2 games they played. And all signs were shown that it was supposed to be the opposite. So league is one thing, Paul will say it's chalk and cheese, because it nearly gives you a false sense of security, thinking you're going great. And then even training levels might plateau a small bit, because I suppose you haven't had that fright. You haven't been knocked out of the league. Like, you haven't finished second, third to a team who can be perceived to be above you. So it's a learning curve for Galway. They learned last year. It should not happen this year, regardless of management. I know there's 2 different management teams from last year this year, but regardless of that, they should learn the lesson that the league means absolutely nothing when it comes to Championship. It's just a new deck of cards and go from there.
The only thing is, Paul, compared to years gone by, like traditionally, you would have had a few weeks of club for the best part where players would have been released back after the league. There was that bit of a break, and then you kind of eased into championship in May. So there was a long period to actually fill in, a lot of tweaking that would have been going on during that period for management. This time round, like the league only finished a couple of weeks ago, and here we are now getting ready for a championship in the coming week. It's new, but still it should probably add a different dynamic.
Yeah, it should, because teams will be, I suppose, the best way to put it, fairly recognisable to what we saw over the last few weeks. Like you said, when there's a big gap, between the old way as it was, where there was maybe 6 weeks or 8 weeks for some teams, where before we saw them in championship again, they'd maybe gotten players back from the club championships. And I know that still is part of this one. We'll see the Ballyhale players as part of Kilkenny, and the Delasal player, or the Ballygunner lads are obviously back for Waterford. But there is a smaller gap. So the Waterford team we would have seen in the league final is, you'd imagine, going to be very similar to the Waterford team that we'll see. Obviously, one or two lads come back, one or two new additions. We imagine we'll see Jamie Barron and Austin Gleeson, and but you'd imagine teams will be fairly recognisable to what we saw, because there is such a small gap. And then again, the same thing carries over for injuries as well. Players that were maybe carrying knocks into the last round of the league, you're still dealing with that problem at the moment, where that wasn't the case in the old style where you had that big gap. So it's an interesting dynamic. The other thing I will say as well is maybe it benefits teams in terms of teams had to finish the league maybe at a high pitch, and teams were playing quite good levels of hurling. The conditions were very similar also. So it's good preparation for teams in that way for the first round of their round robin matches, that it's not 8 weeks. The weather hasn't changed drastically in that time frame. They've been playing competitive matches up till 2, 3, 4 weeks ago. So that huge gap isn't gone. Teams won't be maybe slowly working their way into a championship. It'll be a case of hit the ground running, because they're only back off playing a few weeks ago. Yeah,
the pandemic gave us an enforced break away from these round-robin competitions in Leinster, Munster. You boys both hurled in it, though. Did you enjoy playing in it, James, this idea of playing week-on-week championship games over a kind of a 30-40-day period?
I personally loved it, Will, because I would have advocated a lot over the last couple of years that the ratio for training to games was just far too high. There was years there where we could potentially have had maybe 3 championship games and 120 or 120 training sessions. So you're talking about 1:40. It was just completely, I won't say unrealistic for a full championship year, but it was just it was hard to enjoy. Do you know what I mean? And hard to get motivated. Whereas when you introduce a round robin and couple it close with the league, you've got a whole run of games. So this year's team, for example, they have potentially they have 9, 10, 11 games guaranteed, which is great. So the ratio comes way down. So you're not just training for the sake of training. So but even going down to different grounds, I thoroughly enjoyed going down to Wexford Park or go down to Kilkenny, because that's you're heading into someone's home ground. The atmosphere is always excellent. 9 times out of 10 you get a really good crowd. You're not really, I suppose, the crowd doesn't get lost in a stadium like Croke Park or Thurles, you could say. So I think it was a great restructuring, and I'm delighted to see it back again for it to stay.
Was your experience the same, Paul?
Yeah, very much. Like James said there, I thought a real positive out of it was when I first started playing for Kilkenny. When it came to championship, it was generally Portlaoise, Croke Park. That's where you were playing. If you didn't go well, you got a game in Thurles in an All-Ireland quarter-final or something. But that was generally it. Whereas you don't, it's funny to say, when you look at other sports where they play really important games in their home pitch, or likewise away, but having that dynamic is brilliant. And, we really enjoyed it, having to play week on week. You have a match in Nolan Park, and then you have to travel to Wexford Park. The momentum that was there, and people were only fresh off talking about the match the week before, and suddenly you're into another match. But for me, the really big one was just that playing competitive matches, championship, okay, it's round robin, but championship matches in your home venue. I think that's brilliant. And at club level, sometimes we see it where when it comes to championship, it's neutral venue, or the league basis where it's at neutral venue. But we see it at teams now, certainly see it in Kilkenny, where teams are flipping a coin and, okay, we'll play the home match this year, and if we're not relegated or no team goes up or down and we're in year group next year, we'll play in year pitch. Because that aspect of playing in your home pitch or playing in another team's home pitch, like James said, it adds an extra layer to it. There's a certain element of the fans getting behind it a little bit more. So that's brilliant to have in round robin.
Yeah, look, with the exception of Ed Sheeran changing one of the games for Cork to Semple Stadium at the end of this month, every team is going to have a good ratio of home and away games. I wonder how important that ratio is, though, James, if we're going to kind of focus on Leinster maybe to start, that you probably want to be like the Six Nations. Is there an argument for having the teams you're expected to win at home, clean up those fixtures and get the points on the board, or would you prefer to have the more difficult rival teams at home and to go away to maybe say Laois and Westmeath?
Well, when you get a championship list, let's just talk specifically for Leinster for the moment now, where you've got 4 teams, as I said, very, very evenly pitched together. There's no real gulf from one team to another. Your home games makes an awful difference. So I'm looking at, I'll take my own county for example. We have to go to Wexford on day 1, and that for me is not trying to sound too drastic now at the moment. But that's a make or break game. If you win that game, like you're really heading towards a real positive outcome in this championship, because you've got Kilkenny to come to you and you've got Dublin to come to you. 2 big teams that are coming to you. Whereas when you reverse that, Kilkenny have got a tough side of it. Like, so if Kilkenny, like, on the 1st of May, if they manage to beat Galway, that throws the whole championship into kind of a bit of a disarray, if you like, from a Galway perspective. So your home games are fierce important. And Paul made a great point a moment ago when he was on about 2 games at home in Munster and 2 games away. Whereas in Leinster's instance, someone's getting a short straw, and it'll change next year. Don't get me wrong, but for this year, a lot of we're focused on Galway. We have a couple of home games against big opposition, and when you're playing, as I said to you, opposition, we're so close together. The finest of margins, you're coming down to the influence of a crowd. Like I mentioned there about the crowd being important. It's like going to a Premier League game whereby the home crowd will turn against the away team, and it could be worth a point or two. You never know. The margins are so small, so it's vitally important. And I think you need home games. You need to win your home games, regardless of opposition. In my opinion, I said that a couple of weeks back in the league. And if you win your home games, at least you're in a good position. And in Galway's instance, if you win the 2 league home games, you have 2 of the big 4 taken down.
All right. Well then, Paul, let's give you a shout in Galway then, because we're trying to pick out what teams are going to get out of the provinces here. It was 2 and done last year, miserable campaign. They're going to have to improve on that under Henry Shefflin this year. Galway have got this difficult start. They go to Wexford, I think it's Westmeath at home, Kilkenny at home, and the 2 fixtures after that. So they've got 2 home games after the trip, after the game this Saturday. Paul, do you see Galway getting out of Leinster, getting into a provincial final this year?
I suppose if you asked me at the start, I was looking at the fixtures and trying to figure out who do I see basically first of all in the Leinster final. Like, my gut was kind of telling me that I kind of think Kilkenny and Wexford, just by Wexford, the basis that Wexford are playing off. I know Skehill won't like that, but I think what the problem is that I think Kilkenny will mount serious challenges. Like, they'll target the games and they'll go hard at them. But the one question that we saw Galway starting well in the league, but then they're a little bit of a question mark. They lost to Wexford at home. So that was kind of a one. And it was a game they could have won. Wexford didn't light it up, but they could have won it. So that for me was kind of going, you're looking for these small indicators where a team mightn't perform. Like, the biggest game I see that could decide I think Wexford are going to make the Leinster final anyway. But Kilkenny going to Galway in the 3rd round, I think that's a huge one, because Galway have to win that one from the point of view that it's a home game. If you have any intentions of winning the Leinster, you have to win your home games. But again, we haven't beaten Galway in Pearse Stadium in quite a while in a competitive match. So that's another thing to look at. So I think there's a lot to be told out of that one. Like, again, maybe it's my heart speaking over my head by saying that Kilkenny will be in the Leinster final. But I just think Kilkenny's stock was rising towards the end of the league, and they had lads come back. They had Adrian Mullen to come back and Owen Cody and these lads. That's why I'm kind of just edging it with Kilkenny. And again, like I said, some people might think that I'm talking with my heart there over my head, but I think Galway just left a few question marks over themselves towards the end of the league. Started really good. The performance they put in against Limerick, we were looking at them going, this is the Galway we've seen over the last few years that are going to perform really well, but then kind of drifted a small bit in the league. So look, again, we said at the start that we can't take everything from the league as gospel into the championship, but that's something that Galway have to answer for. And if they go to Wexford, like, that'd be a huge scalp for Galway if they go to Wexford. But those we're kind of expecting, well, I'm certainly expecting Wexford there to, Wexford do have a kind of a siege mentality down below in Wexford Park. So it's a big one for Galway, and if Galway get over that, I think then you change your tune about Galway and you go, that's a huge win for Galway, because that would be a big one. In the end, they go Westmeath the following week, you're expecting them to win that. A big decider then with Kilkenny up in Pearse Stadium, and then they have Laois away, again you'll expect them to win that, and then they'll have Dublin at home, which again I expect Galway to win that one. So I think the big one there that will decide Kilkenny and Galway's year is the one in Pearse Stadium.
Just before Skehill comes in on that, just to come back to the point about question marks about Galway. So do you think there's more question marks about Galway going into this weekend than the questions we would have had about Wexford's defending against Waterford 2 weeks ago?
I do think so, from the point of view that I think structurally Wexford against Waterford, they set up a bit different the way they normally set up. Galway didn't overly change what they were doing in the league. They just dropped their intensity, and they weren't committing as hard as they were in, let's say, the Limerick match. They just seemed to fade away a small bit. Galway have all the players they need to go and win the All-Ireland straight out, and I think they're one of the teams that can actually go and beat Limerick in a championship, and that's kind of something we're looking for. They could go beat Waterford, they could go beat Limerick, they can beat anyone they want. It's just the manner in which they finished up the league. It kind of went, what we saw, as James was talking about there, when they just missed out when we drew with Wexford down in Wexford Park, was it 2018? If you come into the round robin phase and you kind of come in with your form just drifting along, it's a dangerous thing, because it is competitive, and as much people like to say Munster is the more competitive. If you don't get your good run of form and win the matches you're expected to win, and more importantly win your home matches in Leinster, that could be a problem for Galway. So that's the question mark I'm saying with Galway at the moment, is that if they finish strong to the league, I'll be going, okay, Galway are dangerous. But they faded out a small bit, and that's the only thing that I'm saying, that we don't know what Galway we're going to see yet when it comes to the championship.
All right, James, Galway fading a bit is a question mark. I'm sure you're going to say to us that you didn't take heavy beatings like Wexford did against Dublin and against Waterford.
No, and I take what Murphy's saying on board. I do, because there's proof at the pudding there that Galway faded the league and we completely faded out of the championship last year. So I can't debate him. Like, for years Galway faded out of championships. Sure, we couldn't make it past the Galway races there for 7 or 8 years. And until we turned it over for more recent times. So I get what you're saying. And I'm looking down, and I was thinking, how many guys of the 2017 Galway team are still involved in the panel on the team? And there's 9. 9 of the starting 15 are still there. So I'm thinking, go down to Wexford, which is, let's be honest, like, if it's it'll probably be hopefully a fine day. It's a bit of a cauldron. They're rapturous. They're very vocal down there. But the experience is there from the Galway lads. So I don't buy this about they're trying to blood young players. Some young players, yeah, but they have a wealth of experience in the starting 15 as well. So I'm expecting them to go down and do a job. And I'm looking at that result. If they can get a positive result there, they'll most likely come up to Kilkenny with 4 points, or Kilkenny will come up to Galway with 4 points themselves, and Galway at 4 points, and that then will decide, I think, who goes through. If in the event Wexford top of Galway will likely meet Kilkenny with 2 points, and then the Kilkenny game becomes even bigger, because if Kilkenny take out Galway, that's it. I think it'll be very hard to see Galway come back after that, because they're after losing to two of the big three. So I can't underestimate the first game. You're going to ask me who's going to make the final, and I am going to say Galway, but I'm also going to say Kilkenny. Okay, nice. I do think, yeah, I don't understand how. I do think that Galway will beat Wexford at home. I think Galway will beat Kilkenny at home, but I also think Kilkenny will beat Wexford and Kilkenny beat Dublin. So I'm thinking it's going to be down to the wire, because Kilkenny's, I suppose, have 2 very important games in the last 2 rounds, whereas Galway will have 9/10 of the work done by the first of May in the first 3 rounds. So it's hard. You won't see it all decided in the first couple of weeks. I think from a Galway perspective, you'll see it's substantially decided, but for the rest, it won't be. So I'm going to say Galway-Kilkenny final, with Galway to beat Kilkenny.
That is, by the way, that is the dream narrative for a neutral going into the final round of fixtures, where you'll have all the teams on roughly the same points going into that last game, and a shootout to see not just who gets the final, but it'll be a shootout to see who comes third in the group as well, because 3rd and 4th will be on the line. Very interesting if that happens. On Galway, James, before we talk about Kilkenny, because you both are now agreeing that Kilkenny are the best team in the province, or at least one of the top 2 are going to get to the final. Where do you see Galway now? Because you've had a bit of time to reflect on the 5 or 6 games that we've seen. Like, what's Henry Shefflin changed, or where Galway are at now? Because start of the league, we were talking about all the talent, Whelan, Mannion, all those good stickmen that are across the team. But what kind of a difference has Shefflin made in what you've observed so far?
I think for the man himself, I think he's had to contend with a lot of difficulties, both on and off the pitch. So that's the first thing, And I think from an on the pitch perspective, he's had to deal with obviously player losses, big player losses, you could say. Important player losses. So I think he's had to find replacements. He's had to find a balance of a team, and he's had to find a game plan that suits that new team. Now, I know I just said a moment ago we've got 9 players off the 17, starting 15, but maybe all them 9 mightn't start. They mightn't suit Henry's system or Henry's game plan. He might have a high octane, high energy, work like a dog for 50 minutes and bring in the subs kind of mentality, or bringing the more experienced lads to finish out a game. So I don't know. It's been very quiet, I have to say. It's been they've shut up shop over the last couple of weeks since the league campaign ended. Injury wise, I think they're not too bad. I think just Jason Flynn is a long term injury, but they seem to have a clean bill of health ish, you could say. They've cut the panel, and there's a couple of guys who were on that starting 15 have been released in terms of Adrian Toohey and Niall Brooks. So you'd class that as a couple of experienced heads and players who would thought maybe would still carry a bit of influence on a team, but maybe not. So obviously Henry has seen different things in other players that he has. I'd say I said at the start of the year, what would be success for Galway? I thought a league semi-final, and I think getting to a Leinster final would be successful, and then go from there into knockout stages, and I still stand by that. And it's very hard for me to make a prediction. I know we're having a bit of crack here, don't get me wrong, and I'm saying Galway are going to win Leinster. And I'll say that every day. Even if Wexford hammers, I'm still going to say Galway are going to win Leinster. So I'm just going to stick with that narrative, right? But I won't know, to be honest, until 15 minutes are gone in the Wexford game. It's very hard to tell because you don't know how lads are training. I'm just thinking a team that stands out in my head. I know I'm moving province is Tipperary. They're in the long rest. They're probably training fierce well together, and then they've got Waterford coming down to them. So who knows how that's going to go? And I'm the same with Galway. They've been out a while, probably training fierce well, good buzz, energy, and got to do with the league is probably well and truly gone. But I won't know, and I guarantee you the players themselves mightn't know either until the first 10-15 minutes when the ball's thrown in Wexford Park.
But let's not forget, look, if it wasn't for Richie Hogan and his juggling skills at Croke Park a couple of years ago, Galway could have been Leinster champions that year. Probably should have been, realistically. We read a lot into last year, but funnily enough, if it wasn't for that intervention and that kind of moment of brilliance which really swung a game, we could be talking about the fact that Galway were the Leinster champions of just a couple of years ago, and who knows what would have happened later in the year with the way they played in that semi-final. There's all ifs and buts about injuries and how close they were to Limerick at the time. And God, it's only a few weeks ago, Paul, that we were talking about Galway once they'd beaten Limerick, saying that they had all the weapons to potentially beat Limerick later in the year. Yeah,
absolutely, and that's the one thing with Galway. There's no one denying, and I'm certainly not denying that they have the talent to win the All-Ireland. That's the bottom line. If you had to pick one sentence to describe Galway, they absolutely have the talent to win the All-Ireland. It's just a matter of, will they just click? Will it just be a case of that they go out there, they can go to Wexford Park, put in a savage performance, and come out of there with a really good win. I think it's Westmeath they had the following week then, and they have Kilkenny then at home, and now you have the momentum and off you go. So it's just a matter of will they find. I think they need to bring, look, we talked about it already, they need to bring Cathal Mannion out around the middle of the field and get the ball moving there. I think if you see Cathal Mannion in around the corner forward, for me anyway, and what do I know, but for me I would be kind of saying that if Cathal Mannion is still in around the full forward line, Galway have questions over who their scorers are. For me, Cathal Mannion is a playmaker for them. He links everything up. So I'm expecting to see, a really, obviously a strong team going down to Wexford Park. If I see Cathal Mannion out around the middle and, you have your Conor Whelan in around the edge of the box, you'll see a bit of shape to the team then. I'm thinking they are gonna go well, but it's just until I see it, I'm kind of waiting to see what Galway are going to do, because it's just sometimes they flatter to deceive sometimes, and that's the only thing. And in this round robin, it's tricky. The other side of the coin in this, in terms of going back to the table as well, is that the table will be deceiving for the first few weeks, because Kilkenny will have 4 points after the first 2 matches. You'd imagine, they're going to play Westmeath and they'll play Laois. Whereas if you look at the other teams there, Wexford have Galway and Dublin. And depending on how they go, if Galway turn them over, Wexford potentially might only have 2 points after the first round. So it's going to be tricky to gauge it. I think after the third round is really where we start to see how teams are really going. But look, that's the only thing with Galway. There's no one denying how good they are. It's just a matter of, will they find the form when they need it most?
Paul, if you were still on the Kilkenny panel, would you prefer the start that Kilkenny have this year, where they go to Cusack Park next weekend, will be expected to win against the Division 2A champions Westmeath, then they bring Laois to Nolan Park the week afterwards? As you say, all expectation will be 4 points before the mini break for Kilkenny, and then harder tasks after that. Or would you prefer to be like Wexford and Galway, where you play one of your opponents to actually start the championship off?
Yeah, look, there's pros and cons to both. I think from Kilkenny's side of the house, if we refer to Kilkenny's fixtures, okay, they have Westmeath away and they have Laois at home. What I think Kilkenny will do in this, they will put out strong teams, but for me, if Brian Cody has any intentions of playing the likes of Richie Hogan or getting TJ Reed back into the team, look, again, TJ Reed's an excellent hurler, but he's been away from playing with the club for a while. He needs to get up to the match speed of intercounty. So it's ideal timing in that way. That's the pros of Kilkenny's start. But like you said, the cons is, Wexford and Galway have no doubt about the start. They're laser focused on the start, and they have to start strong and not lose points or lose ground on any other team. So they have to start strong. And then, let's say, for example, Wexford, like Wexford then have their third match, they're playing Laois, and I don't mean to be dismissive to Laois or Westmeath, but Wexford have 2 strong matches at the start, and then they have a bit of a break where it's not a break, but they can still afford to maybe hold back 1 or 2 players to approach the next games. And again, that's not to insult any teams, but Wexford have the firepower at the moment to do that. Which would I prefer? To be honest, I'd probably prefer doing what Wexford are doing. Like Wexford are very similar to Kilkenny, and Wexford only have 2 home matches in this round robin series, but the 2 home matches they have are Galway and Dublin. That's ideal, really. They're taking 2 big scalps there at home if they can. Whereas if you look at the 2 home matches Kilkenny have, they have Wexford, brilliant, and they have Laois. Kilkenny be happy enough to go on the road to Laois there and maybe get Dublin or Galway at home. So there's a good few things with it, but I'd rather the likes of Wexford there, to be honest, their setup of where you have 2 hard matches at the start, go in, take 2 big, if you can get 2 big wins out of that, and then maybe look at, you have Laois and Westmeath, get on the road to Laois and Westmeath, hopefully get, again, which I expect, get 2 more wins there, and then you can go and tackle Kilkenny in the park and potentially be already safe enough as it is. So I would rather start with 2 good matches there, to be honest.
Well, Richie Hogan is going to be, I would think, used sparingly and used as an impact substitute this year. You said, if about TJ coming back in. There's no if, is there? TJ comes in to start.
Yeah, I'd imagine so, but like Brian Cody is Brian Cody. He could see how things are going to go and maybe play him for half an hour. It's hard to know what way he's going to go. TJ was carrying an injury at the end of the club championship, so it's there is that dynamic there. I do believe he'll start, but you always have to go with the thing that Brian plays it as he sees it. He picks the team as he sees it. You wouldn't know what he could do, but everybody would believe 90% chance TJ Reed will be starting. So look again.
Two weeks ago, he was in your top 5 hurlers.
He is in my top 5. But is he in Brian Cody's top 5? That's the question. Doesn't matter about my top 5.
You're being cute now, Murphy. The only reason he won't start is if he's injured. Tell us the truth.
Well, that's the thing.
Is he hurt?
Well, no, I don't know if he's hurt, to be honest. I don't know. I know he's injured at the end of it. He was carrying a groin injury. That was in the paper, and he talked very openly about it. But it's ideal for Brian there. If he's if you were going into the Galway match. Well, TJ hasn't played an inter-county match this year. Some people would say it's risky to start it. Is he carrying an injury? I don't know. Haven't been talking to TJ, couldn't be sure. But the Westmeath match is ideal that way, in that you can start the Westmeath match, get him going, and then see how he is, because the Westmeath lads will hit harder than what he was experiencing in the club championship, and it'll be a chance to test it. So, look. If Kilkenny were playing Galway in the first round, I don't know if TJ Reid would start. I would start him. I don't know if Brian Cody would start him, because Brian has seen a lot of players put their hand up for jerseys. So what's Brian Cody looking for in a player at the moment, and what state is TJ Reid in at the moment? I think he'll be fit enough, and I think he will start. But I'm just saying that there is the what if there, that Brian might look at it a little bit differently.
Yeah. Look, if he's an hour hurling, I think in his legs after the first 2 games, he's going to be good to go for the other 3 fixtures. James, why are you so confident about Kilkenny getting to a Leinster final then?
I don't know.
Or how confident are you if you say I don't know?
I think I've grown up not to underestimate Kilkenny. I would and the reason being is because they've always produced performances when probably they weren't expected to. Do you know what I mean? To be honest, when they had the teams of old that they were in pure state of domination, fine, okay, put that aside. But in more recent years, they haven't had the teams who carried the same state domination as years previous, and they're still grinding out results. And I just think back. A clear example is the semi-final they played against Limerick in 2019, wasn't it, Murph? Was it?
The semi-final, yeah, 2019.
Limerick, yeah, and that just everything was stacked against them. Limerick were after winning that Ireland the year previous. They were on, obviously, the ascendancy across in everyone's. They were the team in everyone's minds, and they were. I would be honest, they were a shoe-in for the final, in my opinion. And next thing, Kilkenny come out and just hit them straight in the mouth for the first 20 minutes, and Limerick were stunned. You know what I mean? And that performance kind of sticks in my head, and it's synonymous with Kilkenny over the years. So I would never doubt them, And I make no bones about it. Galway's most difficult game, with respect, is going to be Kilkenny at home, And that's a big one. If you win that one, I'm telling you, you're kind of on the pig's back to getting qualified. But I still expect them to be in the Leinster final. Now, I also say when we played Kilkenny in 2018 in the Leinster final, we were after coming through a round robin series where we won every game. To be honest, right, we won every game kind of comfortable enough. We knew going down to Wexford, we were going to beat Wexford. Kilkenny were coming to us. We said we knew we could take them and probably, with the home crowd behind us, get on top of them early, and we did. and then we finished out the round robin, and then the Leinster final came, and I was kind of saying we're primed for a good run here now to move Kilkenny aside and move on to the championship, and that didn't happen at all. The first day we got out in front and they kept at us, and we ended up lucky to draw the game. And then the second day, again, off out in front, Kilkenny came at us. So those type of games are just, they're like a synopsis of where Kilkenny are for the last 20 odd years. You know what I mean? They're never bet. So I will never say in a Leinster Championship that Kilkenny are not going to make a final, because regardless of who they produce, even the young guys they've produced in the league campaign, guys who I've never heard of up until 2-3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, are producing performances like seasoned veterans, so it's just something. I know I might sound stupid, there's something different down there. I don't know what it is, it's hard for me to explain, but
I think, Skehill, we've all kind of been tricked by this, or we've all kind of thought that this Kilkenny team is coming to an end, or Cody's golden touch is starting to slip. Like, I remember even going back to 2019, and you mentioned like that colossal performance that Kilkenny put in an All-Ireland semi-final against Limerick. I remember lots of people thought the Cork were going to beat them the round before in the quarter-final. Most people thought when they went into that semi-final, this Limerick team had announced themselves, they were ready to take over and be the team at the top. Alright, the final didn't go Kilkenny's way, but they still got to an All-Ireland final that year. They won a league. Was the year before, Paul, that you would have won the league kind of against the odds, Division 1 as well?
Yeah, 2018 I think it was. Yeah.
And again, people thought that this was Cody's last stand. He was, somehow getting the last bits out of that team, and players from, a decade before were coming towards the end of their career, and were enough new players coming in. I've seen Kilkenny's obituary written so many times, Paul, over the last decade, and yet you guys keep coming back. There's no way of actually keeping Kilkenny down, it seems. Yeah,
look, it's hard to know what it is, but I suppose going back to those matches, the likes of the Cork one, what you at least look for any team, and it's something I'm very proud to have been part of in teams, is that when there was a challenge there in front of us, lads took it on for better or worse. Like Galway and those matches that James you were talking about, you were the better team, but we at least didn't give up the ghost, and we fought and we got to a draw. And then in Thurles, even won well enough in Thurles in the end, but we brought it back to a draw in the Leinster final, and it got away from us. You were the better team, and you had a bit more strength, and you were in better form and everything. But at least we kind of gave it a crack, and that's the kind of mentality. Going back to the Limerick match, I remember the trainings in the run to the Limerick match. Lads were on cloud nine because we were being written off, and the idea that we get to play, the All-Ireland champions, this is absolutely brilliant. And I think we kind of felt that in training, we were tearing strips off each other, and we felt that no one's expecting this to happen, that we're going to take lumps off them. Now, not that we were saying we're going to go out there and win the match, but lads were of the attitude, we're going to go out there and die trying. So that's kind of what you see. You see the aggression there in some of the matches. Kilkenny didn't perform well in the league against Tip and Thurles, but the performance they put in against Dublin up in Parnell Park, they didn't care it was Parnell Park, they didn't care it was Dublin. They just went and, performed really well, could only play what was in front of them, and a savage victory. So what I think you will get out of the team, and I was delighted with Kilkenny how they performed against Cork in Páirc Uí Chaoimh. Okay, Cork won in the end, but what I saw from Kilkenny from 40-45 minutes, they were very aggressive and they went hard against Cork, and okay, they gave away a good few frees, but the aggression was there and they were trying to do the right things, and at least the passion was there. And that's something that, okay, if you're not going to win a match, but at least pour everything into it. And in fairness, I think I understand that's what James is saying, is that in fairness to Brian, okay, lads will write the obituary about the team and it's happened a good few times, but the players that are there at the moment, look, they have big shoes to fill in many ways, but there's no fear of them going out and giving everything they have and putting in performances. And that's why I'm so happy with seeing the team where they are. They're physically very fit. I always know their heads will be tuned in and they'll give it a crack. Will they beat Galway in Pearse Stadium? I don't know. But they're going to give Galway a savage game. So it's hard to know where it comes from, to be honest, but I just think it's lads not letting the standards drop. That's really what it is. Lads have a bit of pride in themselves in that team. The Pádraig Welches, the Paddy Deegans, Killian Buckleys. Okay, the team mightn't be what the team was 10 years ago, but the lads have a great pride in what they're doing, and they're very professional in what they do as well. So as a supporter of Kilkenny, I'm delighted to see that that's something the lads are carrying on.
Were you assured, Paul, after Parnell Park then, that type of performance against Dublin, you start to think this might be coming together for this year then?
Yeah, I think it was the big part of it is how their performances have tipped along. If you would have put the Tipperary match, let's say if you were to take the Tipperary match as a bubble and put it towards the end of the league, and that was one of the performances I'm looking back on Kilkenny on now, I'd be going similar to what I'm saying with Galway. Oh, maybe there's question marks over Kilkenny approaching the championship, but Kilkenny's stock continued to rise during it, and they started showing that whatever team they put out, whatever players were being tried, each player, there was one thing they kept doing. They were working hard, they were tracking, they were fighting, they were blocking, they were looking to do the right things, and that's why I was delighted. And the Dublin match was the first time where we saw it really clicking and going brilliant. And the Waterford match then again, look, Waterford came, I tipped Waterford to win that match on the podcast the week before, and I expected Waterford to win, but I thought Kilkenny might stay within 4 or 5 points of them just based on the performances. And Kilkenny went out, savage performance, bet Waterford. Okay, some people maybe will say Waterford weren't at the pitch of the game, but look, again, Kilkenny can only play what were in front of them. So for me, that's what I'm looking at Kilkenny going. They're headed in the right direction. They look really fit. They're looking strong. They have lads coming back from, let's say, hurling with the club. You have Adrian Mullen, these lads to inject back into the team. So that's why I'm looking at Kilkenny going, they're in a good place, and they're young as well. That's another thing to say. If we're writing them off at one side where people are saying an obituary, there's a lot of young players there. You know, you're not dealing with the case of you're basing the team around 7 players who are now past 30. That's not what Kilkenny are doing anymore. You know, you have Richie Reid or Paddy Deegan at centre back potentially. You have Pádraig Welch at centre forward. You know, you have all these younger players coming through as well, Tommy Welch's, Billy Ryan's and all these. So it's a young team. So that's why I'm so optimistic about Kilkenny at the moment.
Yeah, well look, 2 young hurlers of the year who are going to be available to play in the forward line. One of the best hurlers of his generation in TJ Reid still come back into the team. We've spoken about the likes of Mikey Butler and Blanchfield coming into the team. I'm with you guys. I think it's Kilkenny and another for the Leinster final. Will be probably proven horribly wrong in a few weeks' time. But Dublin, James, the only real issue I would have with Dublin at all in the league would probably be that defeat against Kilkenny. Like, aside from that, they went to Semple Stadium, hurled really well, beat Tipperary, did the business in the other fixtures within their group. Were probably unlucky not to qualify. Got a good draw against Waterford in the first game. Not really a whole lot to dislike about what Dublin have done so far, but I think everyone has this kind of nagging doubt about Dublin as to whether they're going to beat, say, Galway, Wexford, Kilkenny, and you might have to beat 2 of them to get to a Leinster final. Yeah,
like we're probably here talking an hour, like we've only mentioned Dublin now at this stage. And look, Rome wasn't built in a day, but you know, it could be easily knocked in a day in hurling as well when you think about it, because after that game against Kilkenny, I thought, Jesus, the Dublin looked at 6 and 7s, and I was tipping them the week before to put in a really strong performance against them. I actually think off memory, I think I backed them to beat Kilkenny, you know, off the back of the tip performance. So it's a bit like Galway sometimes, Will. Sometimes you don't know. Do you know what I mean? You don't know until they get going whether it clicks right at them. I thought Kilkenny showed them up kind of tactically a bit, you know, that Kilkenny got around their sweeper and Dublin couldn't get around Kilkenny's sweeper. So it's a case of I'd like to see how they react to with a plan B or a plan C when teams kind of nullify their plan A. That seems to be a problem with them over the last couple of years, that once teams nullify plan A, they kind of go back into sort of bad habits, playing somewhat of an individual game, shooting from crazy angles, you know, and not kind of carrying through patterns of play that they develop so well throughout the league. So I'm interested to see how it all pans out. Like by the time they get to the Galway game at the end, as I said earlier on, we'll know where we all stand. But again, they're in a good position too, because each team has an allowance for bad performance. You know, Limerick can say they had a bad league. Waterford, you know, are probably out by themselves in that they didn't really produce any bad performance as such. We've just talked about Kilkenny with a bad performance against Tip, Galway bad performance against Wexford and so on. So every team, it's the nature of the league. You're allowed a bit of an up and down. So I wouldn't read too much into that game in Parnell Park, you know. So I'm tentative. I would still personally rank them number 4 out of the big 4, if you want to call them that. But again, you just don't know them. Do you know what I mean? What they're capable of producing. And again, they have a good management team and a good manager in Matthew Kinney. So there's no shortage of experience or tactical know-how or even motivation from his perspective. So again, they're primed and they're coming, like as Derek McGrath said about teams in the long grass. Dublin are one of those. Like they could just hit someone in the mouth in the early days and you wouldn't know how the championship would turn out after that.
Right, we'll look at Munster then in a sec, but just to kind of summarise where we're at then, because we naturally enough end up going, I think that team's good, that team's not so good. Both of you are going for Kilkenny to reach the final then. And are we expecting, Paul, you were thinking Wexford with them?
Yeah, I'm kind of leaning towards Wexford at the moment, and I think Galway in third.
Galway will qualify, yeah.
Again, like you kind of have to say these things nearly with a hesitancy, but that's just, you kind of have to give Wexford, I just have to give Wexford the credit where credit's due for their performances in the league, and I think they'll go back to, I think the Waterford one was a blip on the radar really. They tried a few things, didn't work, so I think Wexford will see more of what they did in the league in the championship, so I'm leaning towards Wexford there. And
James, you're going Kilkenny, Galway as the top 2, Wexford then or Dublin for you in third?
Again, it's very hard to decide. You know, we're here making assumptions and making shouts on teams.
That's what you're here for.
And it's very difficult. It's very difficult. You know, like I am going to go with Galway 1. I'm going to go Kilkenny 2, as we just noted. I'm going to have to say Wexford 3, Dublin 4, Laois 5, Westmeath 6.
Okay.
That's kind of my standing.
Because at the bottom, it's a big game for Laois this weekend where they play against Dublin. They'll probably target that as the other game which they could get points out of, if like Westmeath and Laois on the last round, which could determine, it could feel like a playoff when that comes around, depending where the teams are at. So Laois obviously beat Dublin in Championship in 2019, that summer, the magic year they had after they won the Joe Mcdonough and took Dublin out in a qualifier the week after. But it's a big ask to see them
was that at
win
home?
This week. That was at home. That was in Port Laois. They go to Parnell Park this weekend.
Yeah,
so
different animal.
Yeah, it's a big ask for them to win. I think, having watched, I said this to you guys last week, just being in Semple Stadium and watching the Division 2 final, and then a couple of hours later the Division 1 final gets underway, it feels like just two different paces. It's very difficult for Westmeath to try and bridge that gap in a short period of time. Even, I think, to try and take on a Laois team who got a decent run of games in Division 1B, it's going to be very difficult for Westmeath to stay up in the Leinster Championship this year. But that key fixture for them is the last one. And then we'll see how things go with Dublin and Laois this weekend. I don't think Westmeath will win any of the rest of their fixtures. I'd love to be horribly wrong and for the whole round robin to be blown wide open by one of these teams getting a result, but it's very difficult to see it happen. So that's likely to be the relegation game.
So who are you going for?
To get relegated?
Who's your 1 to 6 then?
Who's my 1 to 6?
You're asking us now. We have to put it back on you as well.
This is the whole point. I'm here to ask the questions and to get stuff out of you guys.
As well. We can't take all the flack.
Let's see. I kind of fancy Wexford to beat Galway this weekend. And if they do, I think Kilkenny and Wexford will reach the final. I do fancy Galway to qualify as well as third. I think Dublin will just miss out. And then I think Laois will beat Westmeath, which will keep Laois in the Championship for next year. And Westmeath will go down if there's a non-Kerry winner of the Joe Mcdonough Cup. To be honest, lads, I hate that clause. It's silly. And it's so silly that Kerry could potentially win the Mcdonough. Now, with their form, which we've seen in Division 2A, it's probably not going to happen. But if it does, it's very unfortunate if Kerry had to play against Clare or Tipperary, or, say if one of the other big three that are expected to do well drop down to bottom place in Munster. Kerry would have no chance of beating them. And the next thing, the Joe Mcdonough Cup winners aren't promoted.
Yeah. And it's even, we see in Leinster that, the reason we have the 3 home and 2 away, or we have the 5 matches, is because of the number of teams. But you seem like you're kind of, if Kerry don't get to just walk back up into Munster, whereas it's that sort of angle there that Kerry don't come back into Munster, but it's a thing where Westmeath and Laois, then they're waiting on to see what Kerry do. Like we said, we're not maybe expecting Kerry to come out with Joe Mcdonough, but it's funny that whatever happens in the Joe Mcdonough and Munster was going to affect what's going to happen in Leinster. And if we can have 5 games in Leinster, why can't Munster have 5 games in their province? They have 4 games. So yeah, it's a funny one there, and certainly it's tough on if Kerry do manage to do it. And you imagine one of the years they're heading in the right direction towards doing it, that they have an extra game to try and get through to be where they would feel they deserve to be after winning the Joe Mcdonough.
Yeah, and look, lads, I appreciate that Kerry would find it very, very difficult to go from Division 2A hurling and Joe Mcdonough hurling into playing directly into a Munster Championship, because, look, let's face it, there's probably 4 or 5 of the top teams in the country are involved in that province currently. But at the same time, if you're going to bridge that gap, you should get a chance to be able to play in your home province. To me, it made no sense that Kerry were being locked out. And a few years ago, they were going to go into the Leinster Championship if they won the Joe Mcdonough, and then that rule was changed around as well. I just, again, I hate the idea. I remember when this happened in Division 2A, the league, a few years back as well, where there were playoffs, and Westmeath one year won Division 2A of the league, were very impressive in the league itself, ended up playing Laois in a promotion relegation playoff, and Laois beat them, and Westmeath got no promotion for winning Division 2A of the league. To me, it seems very unfair that you win a competition and don't actually get rewarded for it. And if Kerry are going to improve, surely it makes sense for them to be able to play in their home province. But that's for the rule makers to change. Munster, good luck trying to pick this, lads. But we had 3 Munster teams who've come out of the league in exceptionally good form, you would probably argue. Especially Waterford have come out of this looking very impressive. Cork, with the exception of the final, looked good. They had that comeback win against Kilkenny. They played really well against Limerick. We know where Limerick's level is at. We can almost rank them as favourites for the All-Ireland despite what happened in the league this year. Then you talk about the long grass, James, with Tipperary and with Clare. Clare will argue Tony Kelly's back. A few of the other injuries are starting to clear up. I think Shane O'Donnell is nearly back to full fitness. Some of those kind of niggly injuries that they had for a few weeks during the league might just have settled down while they had a break. And then people are kind of writing Tipperary off because they have to go to Waterford in the first round, and it's expected that Waterford is just going to take them out. But I'm sure Liam Cahill is getting it across that Tipperary won't be easy to beat. This province is so difficult to actually tell what's going to happen over the next month.
I can't see. In Leinster, you've got, as we mentioned, you've got 5 rounds, and every team is playing each week. So every team is playing when the rest of the teams are playing. In Munster, it's a bit scattered, so it's kind of hard to plan or kind of play out how this is going to happen, because there's, like, if you take Limerick for example, they play Cork and Waterford in their first 2 games, then they have 2 weeks off. Waterford play Tipperary and Limerick in the first 2 games, then they have 3 weeks off. So how does the break come into it? If lads get injured, if lads are in good form, next thing they've got a 3-week hiatus, they get injured. It's so hard to kind of plan all this out. But Munster is, like, to be honest, it's toss the kind of stuff. I think if I was to pick my 3 right now, I would pick in probably Cork, Limerick and Waterford. However, in 2 weeks' time or 3 weeks' time, I could be proven so wrong, because that's just the nature of the Munster Championship. How many times over the years have we seen, teams who were, I suppose, supposed to win the game and win it comfortably get turned over? We've seen it in the kind of go way back in the years with Limerick and Tip when they had the 3 games. Limerick weren't supposed to get over Tip. Do you know what I mean? But that's just what the Munster Championship produces. And you think of the Waterford teams when they're beating Cork in their prime in 04 in that time. So it's a fantastic championship. But again, it's so hard to call. Tipperary are such a proud hurling county, and they're probably down there. There's probably people around the area expecting them to get, everybody else bar Tip get wiped by Waterford. That's to be honest about it. But Tip are in as we say, a small bit of a rebuild process. I don't think they're fazed with that. I don't think they care about it. They're such a proud hurling county with a mass amount of All-Ireland titles that they're probably thinking we're going to take Waterford down, and they're probably in the best position now. Yes, Waterford coming off a very positive league campaign, but Tip are coming with a low expectancy, you could say, nationally. So it's who knows what's going to happen. They still have some serious players, and I know in the NFL they say any given Sunday, but that's the same for the Munster Championship. Any given weekend, someone can take another team. So we said it last week. Really interesting championship. Very hard to call. I don't think Limerick are going to have such a massive gap as they had over the last couple of years. To be honest, I think the pack is closing in somewhat. I think journalists and the public itself are guilty of thinking Limerick are, probably way further ahead than they actually are. I think it's closer, to be honest. So I can't call it. Like, I'll give you my top 3, but I won't give you my winners.
Right, before I bring in Paul in that, James, just going to lob a grenade out there, because I know full well that there's going to be someone in the comments who's going to say, is there any point in Limerick even turning up this year? This tends to be the comments under nearly every video about hurling this year, is that, for some reason the media and pundits are being unfair on Limerick based on the league campaign, and we've all written them off too quickly or whatever else. The only thing is, we're talking about the difficult fixtures. Look at the difficult start that Limerick have. They go to Porky against a Cork team who they lost out to in the league. I know Limerick fans will say they hammered them in the All-Ireland final last year, but still, Cork have been good. And then they have to play Waterford in round 2. Is there any possibility that Limerick start the championship slowly and end up in trouble? No possibility. I think they go down to Cork, and I think they beat Cork by 7 or 8 points. Honest to God, I think that's bold statement. I think Porky Queeve has and there's some lad keeps tagging me on Twitter on about the pitch parameters, how these pitches are certain sizes. You know what I mean? Like, and how I said one day Cusick Park was tight, Porky Queeve is massive, and I do. When you look at the league final last week against Waterford, and you look at the Ireland final against Limerick, and you see when you introduce a massive amount of space to that Cork defence, you'd worry that they're going to leak a lot of goals. And I think Limerick are going to be a bit hurt over the league, to be honest. I know they mightn't listen to too much what old fogies like myself and Murphy say, but I still think that they're going to be primed for a big game against Cork. And if the game turns out how I would expect it to, and Limerick hit them ferociously in the first 10-15 minutes, it could turn into a bit of a drubbing, to be honest. So then they're coming off the back of a positive performance, but then the week after, different kettle of fish entirely. Waterford won't, I don't think they give a damn where they play anybody. I think that's just kind of their mentality at the moment. So going up to Limerick, it makes no difference. I think, don't get me wrong, there'll be a big crowd, full house, probably the game of the championship, but I can't call that one. I'm happy to call the Limerick Cork one, but I can't call Limerick and Waterford. But I still think Limerick will be in a good position after the first 2 rounds, I don't mean to dig you out a hole here, by the way, when it comes to the pitch sizes. And I've seen this before, and I remember I definitely mentioned once upon a time that you go into Cusick Park, it feels tight. And the reason it feels tight, it's not about the pitch itself. So I think the pitch at Cusick Park, and I'm going purely off memory from that chart now at this stage, is about the same size as Croke Park and O'Connor Park, which are perceived as 2 of the bigger pitches across the country for sheer surface area. Yeah. When you stand on the pitch in Cusick Park, versus standing on the pitch at Páirc Uí Chaoimh, where there's probably not a massive difference with the actual pitch parameter, the actual playing surface, but Páirc Uí Chaoimh feels like a much bigger stadium. It's a perception thing more so than the actual pitch itself.
We measured. We were playing Westmeath in Mullingar's Cusack Park as well, isn't it?
Yeah, now Cusack Park is legitimately one of the smallest in the country. That is quite a narrow pitch, and it's quite short because you've got the shopping centre on one end and you've got the flats on the other end. So that is legitimately a tight pitch.
I'll tell you, one of the lads went out, one of the management team went out and measured the pitch with a metre wheel. Mm-hmm. And we were asked in a group with the management team, how much, if you were to ask, they asked the question like, how much bigger is Thurles than Mullingar? And I, being an engineer by trade, put up my hand and say, it's way bigger. It's way bigger. It has to be at least 10 yards in length and 10 yards in width. And then Michael turned around and said, same size.
Amazing, isn't it?
I couldn't believe it.
But then again, the difference on this one is, James, like been down on the pitch in Semple Stadium last week with the two finals, is that the stands feel a distance away from the pitch within Thurles. You go to Mullingar, and the terrace on the far side is legitimately almost up against the sideline. And depending on how wide they've made a pitch at any given time, the sideline is right up against where the managers stand in the kind of technical areres in front of the dugouts. Yeah. So for that reason, it feels that bit narrower. Even if it's not, the perception is that it is.
Páirc Uí Chaoimh, I've only played in the new Páirc Uí Chaoimh once, and it looked huge, absolutely massive. Like, it looked like there was open country there, So that it feels probably the same way as it feels in Croke Park. Probably, obviously, you've got stadiums of similar size, we'll call it, when you talk GA terms. But I just look at that and think, geez, Limerick have open country there. Open country. So I don't know. Yeah,
there you go. Absolutely barrage him in the comments with that graphic again, which has been shown.
Oh, come at me! Yeah, I'm
not sure who made it. I think it's in the same format as GA League table, so I'm going to give them credit and say that possibly it's their graphic that it started with. But it is one of those when you hear pundits say things like it feels tight when you go to somewhere like Ennis. They'll go, "Hey, hold on, Ennis is just as big as these pitches and whatever else." But
but I want fact, Will. I don't want a chart. I want fact. I want a man with a metre wheel. Right?
Hey, are you going to go down with a metre wheel yourself ahead of these games at Cusack Park?
Till I believe it.
Right, James Skehill, we're definitely going to commission him for one of the games in the Munster Championship, and if you see a guy walking with a wheel from the halfway line before the game, it's Skehill. Just double checking the exact dimensions of Cusack Park in Ennis.
Pull over and give him a fiver.
Indeed. Paul, for Limerick, there's no risk then for you either that Limerick start this slowly. You think the few weeks they've had, maybe what we saw at the end of the league, Limerick should be ready to rock when it comes to this weekend?
Yeah, I do believe they'll be ready to rock. I think we're going to see a Limerick that we saw over the last few years, but I can't say that there's no risk because of their league form, like until we see the Limerick coming out and showing us the Limerick that we've seen over the last few years, to be honest, like I believe that we will see the Limerick that we've seen over the last years. Going to Cork, I do think that they'll expose Cork again. The big question mark over Cork is brilliant going forward, but tracking back, that's the problem. I think Limerick they'll be there to get goals, and I think they will get goals. Like we said, the big one then is the following week, the second week against Waterford. That's a big one because Waterford are getting goals now, and maybe that's where Waterford struggled to topple Limerick over the last few years, is getting the goals and getting in behind. And I think Waterford can do it, and I think they have the players there as well. Am I calling it now that Waterford will beat Limerick? No, it's too hard to call. I'd nearly rather see this weekend and go see what's going to happen. I think Waterford will beat Tip at home, to be honest. And I don't think, I hear what James is saying there, but I just still don't think Tip have the panel there yet to go to Waterford. Like, Waterford have 23 or so players at their selection to start the championship match, never mind lads to come on. So I just think Waterford had too much of an assault there for Tip. And again, it goes back to the Liam Cahill factor. I think Liam Cahill will be only too happy to turn over Tipperary again in Welsh Park. But Limerick, yeah, look, I think Limerick are going to come and show us what they're able to show us, and that they'll perform really well. And again, they'll be up around, they're my favourites for the All-Ireland as it is. But that Waterford match in the second round, it's just such a, like, there's a bullseye on it there to say a lot can happen there. Like, if Waterford win that, and Waterford are capable of winning it, it changes the narrative for the year big time, because now Waterford are waiting to get that big victory over Limerick, and when they do get that, that's when the mentality kind of swings that, okay, Limerick haven't to hold on teams anymore now in the championship, and Waterford are that team closest to beating them. So there is a very slight possibility that Limerick bring the form that they had in the league into the championship. But I think they'll beat Cork. I couldn't call it against Waterford, and that's a great way to have it. I just couldn't call it. I think the rest of their matches they win. I think they beat Clare in Ennis and they beat Tipperary, but a lot hinges on them hosting Waterford in the Gaelic grounds, and the Gaelic grounds isn't a fortress at the moment. We've seen teams go there and get the results, and it's probably the one time that Limerick take their eye off the ball also in championship. Cork beat them in the Gaelic grounds. We've seen obviously teams in the league go to the Gaelic grounds and beat them. So the Gaelic grounds isn't a fortress yet for them. So the second round, we're saying the third round for Kilkenny and Galway is going to be a big one. The second round of Munster is going to be absolutely huge with Limerick and Waterford.
Yeah, it's tasty, Paul, when it comes down to that fixture. I wonder too, look, both of you guys have hurled on, All-Ireland winning teams and have got to that level and to the top of the mountain. This Limerick team have been so good over the last 4 years. I wonder if, say, they can take a bit of the pain from the league now. That defeat against Cork, use that for motivation for this week. And the fact that people are now talking up Waterford as being a genuine contender. They'll be mad keen to come out of the traps quickly.
Yes. I was addressed to.
No, sorry, I addressed it to either of you. But genuinely, I do feel that. I think Limerick will be more than happy. They will have sat back, listened to all the talk, I'm sure. And like you guys would have known this from your hurling, like when another team is being talked up ahead of playing them, they will go, right, we're still the big dogs here over the last few years. We've answered the questions. I'll address it directly to you, James, on this one. Like if you take the Tipperary game last year, like Tipperary come with a challenge, Tipperary should have probably buried them. And Limerick were able to find the answers when they were asked the big questions in that game, and they came back and put in 35 minutes of hurling that was just absolutely incredible. Yeah, that's why I have no worry really about Limerick's form. I know I'm saying to you to try and see if there's a bit of a reaction about what could happen in the first two games, but all the evidence that we have before us is that this Limerick team will probably relish the challenge coming to them.
Yeah, but there's no evidence to say otherwise, because every time there's been a challenge put up to them, they've answered it emphatically. You referenced the Munster final in the second half. That was the best half of hurling in the whole, even regardless of the first half of the Ireland final, the way they fought that back and took over the game, and just to be honest, they buried Tipperary. They finished some lads there in that game. They finished them, and that was so impressive. And I think when they look back in that game for last year specifically, that was like a milestone, like that. No matter how far we're down, whether it be 20 minutes gone or half time, no matter how far, we can always come back. They have that in their locker. They have the ability. They have the belief. They have obviously the conditioning, the strength, and the hurlers. When you mix all that together, you get a great potion for success. So I know we were messing and having to crack with rankings throughout the year, and that's fine. That was on current form to say. But when you come into championship, they're just a different animal. And I do believe they get over Cork. And then I think they'll look at the Waterford game, and they'll say, right, you think you're the big dogs, and they're going to hit them with everything. And it's great, because from a neutral perspective, Waterford look at Limerick and say the exact same thing. So we're getting the unstoppable force meeting the immovable object kind of job. Like who's going to win that one? So, and again, we're here now for the last 10 minutes and we can't call it, which is exactly where you want to be. As a neutral, looking forward to getting a spectacle for the probably in earnest the two best teams I think over the course of the last couple of years. So I don't know, but Limerick, I think even if I was in that panel, and I know you've won a couple of Irelands, you've won, let's say, 3 out of the last 4 years. You'd be looking for something, like either you're chasing greatness or you're chasing the next obstacle. So if Kilkenny were going the 4 or 5 in a row, they're chasing greatness, you know what I mean? Like Limerick could probably do both. They're chasing greatness and they're chasing the next big target. So if they put Waterford down, that sends a huge statement around the country. If Waterford put Limerick down, can you beat Limerick twice? I still expect Limerick to qualify. Even regardless, if Waterford take Limerick out in the Gaelic grounds, I still expect Limerick to qualify. Can you beat them twice? And I know Jared McGrath said that whoever beats Waterford is going up the steps. That's fine. Do you know what I mean? But whoever beats Limerick twice is going up the steps,
Paul, how much of a niggle is it in the back of the mind for Waterford now to try and get over Limerick? Because look, all they've achieved this year, Limerick were over on the other side of the draw, didn't get into the knockout stage of the league, so they didn't get to play them. They've got painful memories of an All-Ireland semi-final and All-Ireland final against Limerick. How important is it for Waterford to actually beat them? Like, I appreciate Derek McGrath's exact point that whoever beats Waterford could well be the champions, and maybe Waterford could win All-Ireland without beating Limerick because they could get to the final, even losing that second round game. But how important is it for Waterford, if they are going to go and finally end this way to win a Liam McCarthy, to get a win over Limerick here?
Yeah, I don't know how important it is, but if they do beat them in the early stages, well, I think that answers a massive question. Like, there is it fair to say that there's a question, can Waterford? Yeah, there is, because they haven't beaten them yet, like in the championship with this group of players. So the big thing is that if Waterford beat them in that second match, Well, at the moment, a lot of people are thinking, and I'm sure the Waterford lads are thinking, yeah, they're capable of winning the All-Ireland, but it's kind of a will they, won't they, until they prove it against Limerick. That's the big thing. If they go and beat Limerick in that match, and suddenly now, and it's another thing Waterford will have to deal with, is there'll be serious hype around Waterford that they are then the favourites. Because I think if Waterford beat Limerick there, Waterford then become the favourites for the All-Ireland. Because at the moment, I think everybody, you talk to anyone on the street, it's Limerick, for me anyway, is the favourites. Other people might have different opinions, but I think if Waterford beat them there, now Waterford have to deal with the thing of there's an expectation on them to go out now and win the All-Ireland. But like James was saying, it's not enough to do it once. You're going to have to do it twice. It's not the end of Waterford's year if they don't beat Limerick there, because they have to go to the Gaelic grounds and Limerick will come strong at them, and probably Limerick will be expected to win that. It's not the end of Waterford's year, and Waterford, I expect, will have another crack at Limerick depending on what way the fixtures go. Waterford, it won't just kill them in their tracks. Waterford will go on and win the rest of their matches, I believe, and they'll have a chance to meet Limerick again. So as James was saying, look, you can take a lot from that second match. If Waterford go and meet them, brilliant, but they're going to have to do it again most likely at some stage during the year. So it would be a big thing for them to do it. It would answer a lot of questions. The flip side to that then is, if they do beat them, yeah, they've answered the question, but now they're going to have to deal with the pressure, and that's another thing altogether, where they'll have to deal with the pressure of their own supporters constantly saying to them that you're going to go win the All-Ireland. And now we're probably back to that expectation in Waterford that was heaped on players, that year the generation are going to win the All-Ireland for us. At the moment, they're kind of in this, they're probably riding the crest of a wave at the moment, and it's brilliant and whatever, but I don't think they don't look like a team hurling with pressure. But if they go and beat Limerick, there's an element that might creep into their game, positive in one way, negative in another. So they're going to have to answer it at some stage if they want to be All-Ireland champions, and that's the bottom line.
Yeah, that weight of expectation is never easy. And look, Limerick had to get through that, where they were hearing about generations with their fathers and relations who would have been, great hurlers in the 1970s, and they had had so much disappointment in finals. They put that behind them. Once they won one, that opened the gateway to win more. And I think with Waterford, that could be the case as well. It's kind of funny. I remember actually talking to the aforementioned Derek McGrath about this previously. I was wondering, what was the emotional toll like? Because you saw him and Dan Shanahan, after they lost to Galway, and it was like so close they could almost touch it. It felt like they were going to an All-Ireland final in great form. And he was saying almost the most difficult time emotionally was after they beat Cork, because the feeling was that they thought they were there and they felt that they were, in a position to get there. The All-Ireland final week just kind of ran itself off. But he was saying it was very difficult just to kind of deal with that expectation when, everyone's reminding you haven't won one since the 50s. You're trying to get over the line, and are you going to be the generation who's going to do so? And that weight of expectation will still be there, even though these guys have hurled in finals. Maybe it's different now that there's a group of players who've all got league medals. There's the Ballygunner players who've gone to Croke Park and who've beaten the best club team of all time in Ballyhale Shamrocks. Maybe that changes the mentality. I don't know. But that to me, James, is the only question I have about Waterford this year. I think everything they've done on the pitch has been remarkable, and we talked about after the league final last week. Firepower across their forward line, good balance, different options across the pitch, a very deep panel by the end of the league. And even with that panel, they've got an attacking focus that's about creating chances, particularly creating goal chances. If I was a Waterford fan, I'd be really happy, James, of where I was going into Championship.
I would too, but I'd say I'm going to take a different approach now. We've all highlighted the positives of Waterford and how good they are, and the panel strength and the management group and the energy, etc. Let's look the opposite side now. You just mentioned about Ballygunner and you mentioned about leagues. So look, take where I'm from. Like, we've won leagues and we've had Portumna, we've had Clarenbridge, we've had St Thomas's win Ireland's, but we've also had the 88 team of Galway, and that was always being mentioned. Haven't won an Ireland in 20 odd years. Then it was 25. Then the years started growing, and these players then were, I suppose, they were in the news headlines and they were talking about it, how after certain defeats, and it did become difficult, I'm not going to lie, but it's only when you kind of get to a more senior position in the panel, say when you're into your mid to late 20s, that you kind of learn, and that's the operative word, learn, to put all that SH1T aside and get on with it. So what Paul mentioned, the pressure, really good point. Young lads in Waterford, let's say, when their parents start talking about it, their club mates, their schoolmates, college mates, all that can potentially seep into you a small bit, and you can get maybe a touch complacent, even though you mightn't realise it. You still think you're going to train and putting your best effort in, but there could be little degrees of complacency breeding into your subconscious, and that's the only thing I'd worry for Waterford, is that they nearly believe a bit of the hype. And look, I'm saying this now just purely to pick something out, you know what I mean, because they're in such good form. However, it can always creep in, and if they have a run, a couple of results, and let's say they take down Limerick on the second round, next thing you know, they've beaten Ireland champions, one of the best teams ever, and there's just snowball effects. It gets bigger and bigger, and will they believe it all? That's a question I'd have over them, because I understand exactly where they can be when you have history being thrown at them, when you have I suppose what you look at, again, nationally, people look at Ballygunner success, look at the leagues, and they go, oh yeah, they've done that now. Now they can go on to the Ireland. And I myself would say they're going to make a great run at it, but it's not without its challenges. And I have to make that very, very clear. It's going to be very difficult, and it'll be the hardest championship they'll ever win. The first one is the hardest one ever to win. You know what I mean? To get over the line. And when you put history with it, it's different. A lad told me before, Will, sorry, I digress for a second. If you're from Kilkenny, Tip or Cork, and you are on a panel for 10 years, you will probably get an Ireland medal. Probably.
Other than Cork, and like that's been brought up as a huge issue now in Cork, that they've gone for the first time ever in the history of the GAA for more than a decade. But your point is a very solid one.
So like if you manage to maintain, on that panel for 10 years, you're in with probably an 80% chance of getting an Ireland final, or Ireland at least. It's different when you're Waterford, Galway, and that shows in history books, and you're going to get 5, 6, 7 Irelands, So it's difficult. And again, Waterford was it the 50s was the last time they won it?
It was a 57, I think, off the top of my head.
Jeez, long time ago. You know what I mean? Yeah. But long time ago, and that adds pressure in itself. So look, you'll have your physical challenges with injuries and heading to long games, whatnot, and referees, etc. But the biggest one is the top 6 inches. Like, can you maintain a degree of control when everything else around you, when everyone else around you is losing control? And that's where the supporters in Waterford, you would hope, wouldn't get there. When they get a bit of run up of steam and take down a couple of big scallops, that they don't just assume that Ireland's coming back to them.
Well, look, James, you kicked it off by saying the teams you thought that were going to get out in Munster, and I was kind of scribbling them down here at the same time. Murphy, who's coming out of Munster for you?
Yeah, I'll go. I'd agree. Limerick, Waterford, Cork. In that order, I don't know. I haven't decided between Limerick and Waterford yet. But no, I think Limerick, Waterford, Cork are coming out of it. And again, it is more. It's obviously more competitive. I know. Let's say Clare at the moment have lads come back. Shane O'Donnell potentially coming back, and obviously Tony Kelly. We've seen him coming back towards the end of the league. But I just don't think Clare are in the position yet to actually go, because it's so competitive, and like we're picking apart there really small things in the favourites, because we're struggling to pick apart where this is going to be won and lost. And for me, just Limerick, Waterford, Cork just have so many more things in the positive side going for them at the moment. Okay, we've pulled apart Cork during the week and different things, but I just think Cork, they are in a good place and they are going well. They still have things to work on, that they have to work on Championship. And I think more so towards actually winning Munsters and really winning All Irelands. That's where the questions are. But generally they're going really well. So for me, Limerick, Waterford and Cork are coming out of Munster. But just looking at the fixtures and looking at the breakdown, and Clare unfortunately in the first weekend, they have to watch all the other teams go and play before they enter the Championship, and that's a funny dynamic in itself. Whereas Limerick, I know there's breaks, but let's say technically the week off that Limerick have is the last week, is the 5th round of the Munster Championship. So Limerick just have to go hammer and tongs at it. I know they do have breaks, but they do just go straight at it. They have their 4 matches, the weeks that they're scheduled in. So that's something that has to be factored in again. But I just think, look, like we said, Limerick are going to come strong. Waterford are in great form. I think they're going to win. They'll beat Tip at home. Again, the jury is out with Limerick and Waterford down in Gaelic grounds. I think they'll beat Cork at home as well. And then they have to go to Ennis then as well. So, look, it's for me at the moment, I just think Limerick, Waterford and Cork, they're just giving too many indicators to show that Tip are going to mount a savage challenge, or that Clare are going to, look, no offence, pull a rabbit out of a hat and come out of Munster.
Yeah, it would be a remarkable story. If Clare hit a run of form and qualify with the way the top 3 teams have looked so far this year, it would be some going if they were to get through. I don't think Cork will mind too much going to Semple Stadium, where they had to give away their home advantage, but still it's a game fewer in Páirc Uí Chaoimh. Maybe it's a way of putting that league final defeat behind them a little bit by going back to Semple Stadium and hurling well. Are you putting Cork as your 3rd team to go through then, James?
Yes, I am. I'm having. I can't. It's a toss of a coin, Will. For 1 and 2 between Limerick and Waterford, as we just said, and I'm putting Cork as 3. Again, look, I know when I spoke about Dublin a few minutes ago, I said that one bad game can't exactly dictate how your summer's going to pan out. And look, Cork played bad, don't get me wrong, in the league final, but it's one game. And again, no more than what we said about Galway with experience management and knowledgeable people, they have that, and they have the players. It's just a matter of getting it right. But I am concerned about the first day when, as I'm going to repeat myself, what Limerick could potentially do to them down there, So, again, and what kind of scarring will that do? If Limerick do what I think they'll do, and they'll beat Cork by, a comfortable margin, to be honest, what will that do to Cork? have they got the mental capacity, mental strength to come back and put a run together to get into the Munster final? I don't know. That's a genuine question. That's a genuine question, because these guys, if you're questioning anything, you're questioning their top 6 inches. I will never question their ability. I'll never question their history. I give full respect to them as a group of players, but I do question their defensive capabilities. And when the heat is really on, can they stand up to it?
Paul, for Tipperary, because so much will come down to how they hurled this weekend against Waterford to give a picture of maybe the work they've done since the league. Is the reason that we're not putting Tipperary into the top 3 because the 2 Maras are gone, who are 2 keystone members of their defence, and then you also have to take away Seamus Callan for at least the first 2 rounds? It appears that you might be back kind of into early May, but to be missing like hurler of the year from 2019, 2 incredible hurlers from the last more than a decade since those guys came off that under-21 team, that's a lot to try and fill in a team in a very short period of time, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a lot to fit in. And what we saw from Tip during the league was just that they were struggling to find that really good spread of scores in the half-forward line and full-forward line. They were moving around Jason Ford to try and figure out really where do we put him to maximise the score, and they have him out around centre forward and trying him in at full forward as well. Jake Morris, in fairness to him, Jake Morris was putting in good performances in the league and he was probably winning a lot of dirty ball in there, but really Tip weren't showing that they were producing good ball into the forward line to create that platform for Tipperary to mount really big scores, because to win championship matches now, unfortunately, you're going to have to get a really big score up on the board, because we see the scores that Limericks and Waterfords and Corks are getting at the moment, and it's big, and Tip don't seem to have the firepower at the moment. Again, like you said, Paddy Marr stepping aside, Brendan Marr gone as well, and like these big players who traditionally over the years in Munster and in the All-Irelands would have put in enormous games, and there's your platform and Seamus Callan likewise as well, and Noel McGrath and these lads. I just think at the moment that this year, look, they haven't shown us enough to say that they're in a relatively strong position to go and actually take on the 3 teams, because the other 3 teams we've talked about there, Cork, Limerick and Waterford, do have those things that we're talking about, do have the potential to rack up really high scores, are showing really good form as well. And I just don't see Tip, we saw them against Waterford down in Welsh Park as well, and just didn't have the legs to deal with what Waterford were throwing at them, just did not have it, and Waterford ran away from in the end. And that's something that, it's hard for Tip to, while they're trying to find these new players, you need a big panel, and those things don't go hand in hand when you're trying to find new players, but you need a big panel to go and face a round robin where teams are coming at you thick and fast. So for me, Tip this year just don't get out of Munster, just purely for that reason of the changeover of personnel, and that they're still trying to, I suppose, blood new players and find those scores or replace those scores in the forward line.
Okay, so we're agreed then on our Munster top 3. We're just not quite agreed on who's going to come through. I know James is going to say, well, put your neck on the line and say your pick. I think those 3, yeah. I think Limerick, Waterford will probably get to the final. Cork will qualify. I don't think Cork will beat Limerick this weekend, but I don't know if it's going to be quite the hammering that we're half kind of anticipating here, but we'll see. And then it's going to be difficult. Like maybe Tipperary can have a run and get in ahead of Cork, but it's going to be very tricky for them. I think Joe Mcdonough, don't know how you guys feel about it. I think Antrim's form so far this year would indicate they're probably the strongest of the second flight. They've got a good fixture list as well. They play Offaly, who would have been one of the other contenders, first round this weekend at Corrigan Park. I think if Antrim win that, and all indications going from the recent relegation final between them is Antrim will win. I think Neil McManus is coming back to fitness, who's a big boost for them too. Antrim are very well set for a run to that final, and just I think as well, James, Division 1 hurling, having that campaign behind them where they actually competed very well in the fixtures, with the exception of losing the Laois game, which would have been a disappointment, and Tipperary where they rested some players, but generally they played very well in Division 1, should set Antrim up pretty well for a run at this competition.
Yeah, look, I know they ended up in a relegation final, but if they were to look back, it was relatively successful. I know what you mean. Like, I know that sounds a bit cliche when they didn't really register much wins, but like they're playing an Offaly team now who they easily dismantled with respect without the presence of Neil McManus. So like if you're Darren Gleeson going into that game, you're thinking, we have the tools, like we have the game plan. Like what are Offaly going to come back with at you that is different from a week's previous? It's hard to say. Like I look at that game and say I would expect Antrim to take Offaly by 7-8 points again. When you introduce a player of Neil McManus' calibre who was missing, and then they still got over relatively easy, it's very hard to put kind of Antrim in favour for Offaly at the moment.
Well, we'll see. Look, maybe Kerry and Carlo's form could improve. Division 2A was a weird old league this year with the way that the results worked out, and look, maybe Down can dust themselves off after losing the Division 2A final and go on a good run, because there's plenty of good hurlers on that team, and Paul Sheehan's definitely one of the players to watch out for. We know all about Conor Woods with Down, but keep an eye out for Sheehan at centre half forward throughout this Joe McDonagh Cup campaign too. Paul, I want to ask you, because this isn't exactly, put the boot into Offaly hour, but hey, that's kind of where we're at. I sent you guys on the charter, which was signed by the Offaly under-14s. And this has got like massive amount of attention over the last 3-4 days particularly. I think people are probably familiar with the story, but I'll try and summarise it before we talk about it. Is that 4 players, including the Edenderry Town captain, who played again this weekend, and he saved 3 penalties and scored 1 in a shootout when they won an SFAI Cup regional game in Keene Mcdonough. His dad John has probably been the parent who's spoken the most over the last week or so about the situation. But 4 players who were involved with Edenderry Town playing SFAI Cup quarter-final against Shamrock Rovers, big game. These guys have been involved with Edenderry Town for the last 7 years, and obviously been involved all season. In the case of Keene Mcdonough, captain of the team. The 4 of them went off to play last Saturday in the SFAI Cup, as opposed to going to a session with the Offaly under-14 football development squad. A reason has to be given because of the charter that they've signed. It's not, because some of this argument became you're playing foreign sports, and you're playing foreign sports, the ban has come back in and whatever else. That's some of the kind of language that came around it. But what Offaly GA have said is that they signed up to this charter, and section number 2 is that you have to be available to attend. I believe this is the same with their hurling panels, based on speaking to some of the parents as well, that you have to be able to attend every session. If you can't, you have to give a reason to your coach. And this is being strongly implemented. And full commitment, which was used in the correspondence back and forth with the parents. The children last weekend, and bear in mind these are children, 13, 14 years of age, put down personal reasons as their reasoning for not attending the sessions last Saturday. It's because they were going off to play SFAI Cup. For anyone who's ever been stuck in a dual situation, or getting dragged by teams, usually it wouldn't be this time of year. Now the development panels have gone back a bit earlier, but it would be kind of August, September, when the local soccer team have got some fixtures early in the season and the GA teams are getting ready at the same time. Lads feel a drag to go to play for one team, or it could be rugby or whatever else. I have no doubt that the 4 lads in question felt that they couldn't write down SFAI Cup quarter-final as their reason for missing the session. And that's the reason they stuck down personal reasons. An email was sent to their club on Monday. They were removed from the development panel. They're not part of it now. It seems very unlikely, from speaking to some of the parents of the children affected, that they'll go back in. They haven't necessarily closed the door on going back into Gaelic games again. But that's kind of where we're at. And it sparked a massive debate over the last while. Offaly GA, for their part, from what I've seen, because again, this gets messy when parents start leaking information to the media and private correspondence ends up getting sent out. But basically, the long and the short of it is that Offaly GA are going to back their coaching officer and their football director, who's Declan Kelly, who was the All-Ireland Under-20 winning manager of last year, and obviously has a very high stock within the county on the back of that. And they're going to say that they've reformed the development panels. The clubs all agreed to this. The parents and the children were aware of this before they signed up, and therefore they're taking a very serious approach to this. The guys broke the rules, and therefore the 4 of them have been removed. That's kind of where we're at as we talk at the start of this week. I don't know whether there's going to be more U-turns when the Offaly chairman, Michael Dydon, comes back, but all indications are the 4 lads aren't going to play for the rest of this year. And despite the fact that the GA have even been encouraging multi-sport participation and the importance of not specialising into your late teens, this is where we're at. Could you imagine guys at 13 or 14 years of age signing? Because I showed you guys the charter that they signed. Mm-hmm. Could you imagine signing that, Paul, at 13 or 14?
Yeah, look, to be honest, if I'm be very frank, and like we said, we're not here to jump on Offaly's case. I wouldn't sign it if I was 20 years of age or 30 years of age, to be honest. I just find that it's I'm kind of baffled by it in one way. I appreciate having a charter and having guidelines in which best practice and different things, but signing a charter in which if you break one rule off it, that means you're effectively finished. If that's what we're saying, let's take out of it, like you said, that it wasn't the case that they were going playing a foreign sport, as people might say, and I know that argument is out there, but they missed a training session, which is part of the charter, that if you miss a training session, you don't give a reason, you've broken the rules, so now you're gone. But like I looked at rule 9 on the charter, which is no jewellery to be worn at any time when you're representing the county. I mean, that for me makes no sense. And if a player arrives wearing a necklace onto the pitch, are you going to be as strict then and get rid of them for that reason? I think it's very disappointing for the 4 players in question. I played soccer when I was 13, 14 years of age to a relatively good standard. had decisions to be made, and it's tough at that age. You don't have a clue, and you're a child, as you said, Will. You're a child at that age. You don't know what you want to do yet in life. You don't know if you want to be a GAA player. You don't know if you want to be a soccer player or a rugby player. The only thing I do know is that playing any kind of sport, if you play rugby and you play a GAA, both of them benefit each other. They go hand in hand. If you play soccer and you play Gaelic football, they benefit each other. One of the best forwards in the country, Dessie Hutchinson, spent time at Brighton Hove Albion for how many years, and he's one of the best forwards in the country. I believe one of the reasons he's playing for Waterford at the moment is because, I'm not speaking for the fella, but that he was potentially never tied down at any stage to say, you cannot play, soccer, you cannot play whatever. And again, I know that's Offaly are saying that that's not what they're doing, but certainly it's a big statement for anyone who does want to play different sports. I'd be very disappointed for the 4 players in question, and the reason I say it is because if they're playing at that level at soccer for whatever club it is, they're obviously very dedicated young players. They're obviously players who, are dedicated to their skills, to their fitness, to performing at a really high level, be that in football or be that in soccer. And, this isn't rewarding for them to say that, something you dedicate yourself to and you're trying to split your time between both codes. They're now effectively being punished. And I think they're punishing Offaly football as well. If these are 4 talented players, keep them in the system, And I think as well, Offaly are probably doing themselves a disservice by having such a strict charter that they have to tie themselves to, because now they've put themselves in the situation that if somebody does break the charter, the precedence is now set. That's it. You don't play anymore if you break any rule on that charter. So look, again, it's not an Offaly bashing session here, but it is very disappointing to see it, and I'd be very disappointed for the 4 players in particular.
Yeah, look, I think if your grip is too tight on these things, people will fall through, because I've no doubt that there are teammates and friends of those lads who are on development panels currently and will have looked at this situation. And I've received messages from parents and from other sporting bodies within Offaly over the last week. And the point that a few of them are making, I think, are very fair ones. Tullamore Rugby Club a couple of weeks ago looked to move one of their fixtures because now these development panels are on a Saturday for the Gaelic football. And because everyone is pulling from a very small pool, and bear in mind in a rural county like Offaly, and this could well happen in another county, this is Offaly right now, it could well be another county a few months down the road, is that if you've got talented players, James, in all likelihood they're going to play multi-sports. The guy who's particularly good at Gaelic football is likely to be a good rugby player. We all knew them from school. Someone else is going to be very good at hurling, and therefore they're going to try and play everything, and they're going to try and keep all their mates happy by playing along. And therefore, if you decide to enforce them within the GAA to pick a sport at 13 or 14 years of age, there's a very good chance that the talented athlete at that point says, fine, I'll go play rugby, or fine, I'll go play soccer. And they might actually be lost from the system entirely.
Yeah, which is a pure shame, isn't it? Like if you're anything from 10 right up to 17, in my opinion, you should be just nurtured. Just play the game you want to play as much as you can, play where you want to play, whether it be rugby, soccer, flipping volleyball, who gives a hoot. Just stay within a sport, keep within a structure, and try to play as much as you can and have fun at it. Because that's the whole purpose of being an underage player. Just try and I suppose build your skills, keep within the sport until such time as you have to. And I say have to lightly make a decision of which one you want to pursue because you believe it's your best talent. We have an abundance of it here in Galway, whereby we have very strong rugby clubs, and they get to a certain age, 17, 18, and then they get an opportunity to join Connacht academies, go into AIL squads, and then they make a decision. That's absolutely fine because they were given every opportunity to succeed at both codes, or 3 codes, whatever it is. Like I myself played an awful lot of rugby at a high level, going up underage, and I was given every single opportunity by every club I played for. I was never forced to sign this, what I would call a contract.
When were you told to stop playing rugby then? Or were you told to stop?
I was asked to stop, and I couldn't really say much because I was playing in a position of rugby where I had to get strong and put on weight, whereby when you're playing hurling you have to be, I suppose, in the goalkeeper, more agile and lose the weight. So I was asked by Anthony Cunningham when his first year, that in fairness to him, he was right. He said, look, that we're investing a lot of time in you as a goalkeeper in our squad, and you can't keep doing both. And he was right. I couldn't because it was just, rugby was too physical, as was intercounty training, to keep them both together. And that's fine. I had no issue with that whatsoever. I chose hurling, and on we go. Some guys chose rugby, and on they go, no problem. But when you're 13 or 14, I strongly oppose it. And I'm concerned because I'm concerned for the people who wrote this, who sat around, worded this, came together and said, yeah, this is the right document to issue out to the young lads. You know, at a development squad on 13 and 14, I would be concerned because common sense now is common to think. Like when you're looking at that, and I fully respect Offaly what they're trying to do. Every country's trying to do it. Raise standards, get more buy-in from players, try to get back to a position where Offaly were in football terms in the early 80s and whatnot. That's fine, you know. But did the under-20 team sign this charter last year? You know, I probably doubt it. To be honest, I probably doubt they did. You know, this is probably a knock-on effect of success and trying to get it from a young age, which I respect, but I just think it's done the wrong way. Well,
yeah,
I strongly oppose it. You know.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very good point. It's actually probably harder when lads reach 20 and get to senior. Like as Paul's point at the very start, you put that out in front of a senior player, in all likelihood they're going to go, hold on here a second, like what am I actually signing up for here? Because ultimately you're playing an amateur sport, and sometimes that gets a little bit lost in all this too. I'm surprised that the clubs in Offaly obviously were very aware of this because they were sending the players for trials. Yeah. The players are signing these code of conducts or charters. Their parents are agreeing to them too. I'm amazed that it took this long for it to actually become an issue, that it took someone being dropped for it to be questioned. And ultimately, because all indications are that Offaly GA are going to stand over their decision and back the people who are involved here, is that it's probably going to be the clubs who make the decision to try and change it, if they are going to change it. But I thought it was interesting, a few hurling parents got in contact with me. It's not just a football thing with the Offaly development panels, and they were pointing out, one of them, that their child is probably going to walk off the hurling panel currently because he's playing soccer with one of the local clubs. They're doing reasonably well. They're going for a Midland Schoolboys League title currently. He's kind of a little bit more drawn towards the soccer, but he's mad keen to hurl for the county into the summer, and he's been asked to give this commitment in April. Which is, like, how do you walk away from your mates when you're in the middle of trying to go for a title?
You don't.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Like, how do you walk away from it? And look, the big thing for me is just that who knows what they want to be when they're 14 years of age, 15 years of age. You don't have a clue. You just want to enjoy what you're doing. And I think if the GA in general, and this goes to the GA as a whole, if we really want to keep players involved in the game, and we take a certain level of pride in our amateur status, we have to compete with these other communities, such as the rugby community and the soccer community, where players can actually make a life for themselves and earn quite a lot of money if they do well. Something I think we have to, keep close to our games is that our players are happy and enjoy what they're doing, whereas this kind of brings an element of pressure into them and it ties them down to a certain extent. So there's lots of elements there that go with this that is kind of, it's a tough one to swallow. As to, I understand the principle, it's a good idea on paper, a charter that you're getting players to acknowledge that, and there's good points in it, that you'll be respectful to coaches and things. Yeah, excellent stuff. But there's a few points then that you kind of go, well, maybe it's actually having a negative effect, and overall would have a negative effect on young players, which is what we're talking about now at the moment.
Okay, lads, multi-sport has not harmed some of the best players that we have in various different sports currently. Like Shane Long was able to hurl right up into his minor years with Tipperary, would often played with Cork, got himself a career across channel. You've already mentioned Desi Hutchinson, and there's a feature interview coming up on OTB Sports with him over the next while as an AIB hero from winning the club championship, and he's going to talk about his love for Gaelic football, his love for association football, his love for hurling, and how it's all kind of come together. And then you look at Jack Carthy, if you want to look at rugby right now with James Skehill's example, played with the Roscommon Miners at Croke Park and then went on and focused towards his first love, which was playing rugby. Himself and his brother are now professional international rugby players, and they were playing multiple sports. His brother Luke was also playing Gaelic football, I think up until minor level with Roscommon, and yet these lads, it didn't seem to affect them whatsoever when it went to later in their career. So multi-sport disciplines, it's across the way. And I remember talking to Pat Daly from the GA last summer, because we're in a piece in OTB around this about the future of Irish sport. He said the GA were looking at best practice from elsewhere. They were reading a lot of research from New Zealand in particular, where the worry was in New Zealand was that everyone gets funneled into rugby and people are trying to get into professional rugby, and they were maybe forgetting some of the other sports, and they were trying to point out that some of these lads playing soccer and playing other sports was actually good for their rugby career. So all GA guidance is to go in another direction. So intriguing to see how this story plays out. Lads, it's been great chatting to you on the eve of championship. Paul's going to be on the road I think next week, so we can have a bit of fun and see where he is when we check in after particularly the Munster games next Sunday. We might even have the pod out a little bit earlier next week as a result, but looking forward to this first round of championship and chatting to you next week, lads.
Thanks, lads.
Cheers, Will. Thanks, Will.